On January 17, 1949, the Star Ariel, a British South American Airways Avro Tudor aircraft, disappeared without a trace during a routine flight from Bermuda to Kingston, Jamaica. The weather was calm, the flight was short, and yet the plane vanished mid-flight. No wreckage was ever found, and no distress signal was received. The disappearance of the Star Ariel remains one of aviation's most enduring mysteries, drawing comparisons to modern-day cases like the disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370. But could the two incidents share more than just eerie similarities? Let's investigate. The Star Ariel was part of a fleet of Tudor aircraft operated by British South American Airways, which had already suffered mysterious losses. Just 2 years earlier, the Star Tiger had vanished over the Atlantic under similar circumstances. These disappearances, both within the Bermuda Triangle, raised the suspicions of something beyond mechanical failure or pilot error. On the morning of January 17, 1949, Star Ariel had just returned to Bermuda after a trip to Kingston, Jamaica. The aircraft sat idle on the tarmac at Kindley Field, empty of passengers and awaiting further instructions. Suddenly, an urgent situation arose that required her immediate deployment. Another BSAA Tudor, Star Lion, was approaching Bermuda when it suffered an engine failure. Fortunately, its crew managed to land safely at Kindley Field without injury. But the aircraft was in no condition to continue its journey to Jamaica. Acting swiftly, BSAA reassigned the Star Ariel and her crew to take Star Lion's 13 passengers onward to their destination. The aircraft was promptly refueled and prepared for departure. In addition to the 13 passengers, Star Ariel carried a 7-member crew on her final flight, bringing the total number of people lost to 20. While detailed records on most of the flight crew remain elusive, as locating the official accident report has proven difficult, the aircraft was staffed by 5 flight crew members: a captain, first officer, second officer, flight engineer, and radio operator. The captain, 30-year-old New Zealander John C. McPhee, had enlisted in the Royal New Zealand Air Force in 1942 during World War II and trained in Canada, later piloting Liberator bombers. He was among the first aviators to successfully execute a mid-air refueling over the Atlantic. Following the war, he joined the BOAC but later moved to BSAA, where he saw better career prospects and quickly rose to the rank of captain. Star Ariel took off at 8:41 a.m. for what was expected to be a 6-hour flight to Kingston. Unlike the case of the Star Tiger, the weather conditions were excellent: clear skies, no strong winds, and a bright, sunny morning with no cloud cover above 10,000 feet. The aircraft remained in regular communication with Bermuda for the first hour of the flight, with McPhee and his radio operator providing routine position reports. A transmission approximately 50 minutes into the flight stated, "I departed from Kindley Field at 8:41 a.m. My ETA at Kingston is 2:10 p.m. I am flying in good visibility at 18,000 feet. I was 150 miles south of Kindley Field at 9:32. My ETA at 30 degrees north is 9:37. Will you accept control?" A few minutes later, at 9:42 a.m., McPhee sent a brief follow-up message. "I was 30 degrees north at 9:37. I am changing frequency to MRX. MRX was Kingston's radio call sign. While it was slightly early for McPhee to transfer to Kingston's frequency, still being just an hour from Bermuda, this did not raise any immediate concern. By then, Star Ariel would have been flying over the Sargasso Sea, where passengers and crew might have glimpsed the floating green sargassum seaweed below. No one could have known at the time that this final transmission would be the last ever heard from Star Ariel. Hours passed with no further contact. Shockingly, it took BSAA nearly 2.5 hours after the last transmission to even inquire about Star Ariel's whereabouts. Despite McPhee's statement that he was switching frequencies, Kingston never received any further communication. Even more baffling is the fact that no attempt was made to reach the aircraft through other frequencies, such as those in New York or Nassau. Astonishingly, it wasn't until 5:10 p.m., a staggering 7.5 hours after the last contact, long after the aircraft should have landed in Jamaica, that an attempt was made to check in. But why did they wait so long? Was it a grave miscommunication, sheer negligence, or a complete lack of concern for Star Ariel's safety? We really find it incomprehensible. The lack of debris or any sign of the aircraft left investigators baffled. Official reports suggested possible cabin failure or a structural issue, but no concrete evidence supported these theories. Some speculated that a sudden decompression may have caused the aircraft to break apart, but without wreckage, it was impossible to confirm. The British government's investigation ultimately declared the cause unknown. But was it just a tragic accident or something more sinister? The disappearance of the Star Ariel occurred during the height of the Cold War, a time when espionage, covert operations, and political tensions were at their peak. Bermuda, positioned between Europe and the Americas, was a strategic location for both British and American military activity. Could the Star Ariel have been caught up in a covert military operation? There's reason to believe it might have been. Some researchers point to the aircraft's flight path, passing near US naval testing grounds. If the plane accidentally entered restricted airspace, it's possible it was intercepted or shot down, either deliberately or by accident. The absence of wreckage and the British government's vague conclusion have fueled suspicions of a cover-up. So, did British and American officials work together to suppress the truth to avoid diplomatic fallout? The fact that no distress signal was sent raises further questions. The Tudor's radio equipment was advanced for its time, and the crew was experienced. If the aircraft had suffered mechanical failure, the pilots would likely have had time to communicate. This suggests that whatever happened was sudden and possibly violent. But there's another layer to this mystery. In the years following the Star Ariel's disappearance, British South American Airways folded, and its fleet was absorbed into British Overseas Airways Corporation, or BOAC. Some believe the losses of the Star Tiger and the Star Ariel were part of a larger effort to cover up design flaws in the Tudor aircraft. But why would the British government keep quiet if mechanical failure was to blame? Unless, of course, the disappearance involved more than just faulty engineering. The parallels to MH370 are striking. Both aircraft disappeared under calm conditions. Both sent no distress signals, and both left behind no clear evidence of their fate. Could there be a shared vulnerability or technological flaw? Or do these cases reflect something more deliberate? Acts of sabotage, hijacking, or military intervention? Now, let's break it down and get into the nitty-gritty of the entire story before we jump into the investigation. This is about putting the Star Ariel incident into its proper context, understanding why the plane was flying to Jamaica, the political atmosphere at the time, the people aboard, and more. We're going to dig deep here, leaving no stone unturned, and by doing so, we'll start to unravel the threads that might connect this mystery to others like MH370. Before we can truly analyze the disappearance of the Star Ariel, we need to understand the context in which this tragedy unfolded. What was the purpose of the flight? Who was involved? And crucially, what was going on in the world at the time that might have influenced what happened? The flight's purpose. The Star Ariel was part of British South American Airways, a now defunct airline that primarily provided air services between Britain, the Caribbean, and South America. The flight in question was scheduled to travel from Bermuda to Kingston, Jamaica on January 17, 1949. This wasn't just a commercial flight. It was part of a broader network of post-war international routes designed to promote economic recovery and reintegrate the global economy after the chaos of World War II. Now, what was the real purpose of this flight? BSAA flights were vital at the time, serving not just as a means of transport for civilians, but as a connection between key territories between the British Empire. With the war over, air travel was becoming more important for both economic reasons and the need to maintain influence over far-reaching territories. The British government, through BSAA, was heavily involved in these international operations, using the airline as a strategic link between the UK and its former colonies, such as Jamaica. The Star Ariel was not just an ordinary flight. It was a piece of post-war geopolitical strategy. The political climate of the time. This period, just a few years after World War II, was marked by the intense global power struggle between the United States and the Soviet Union, what we would later call the Cold War. The world was divided into opposing spheres of influence. While the British Empire's grip on its colonies was weakening, the US was rapidly rising as a global superpower. The Cold War had not yet fully taken its shape, but tensions were already high, and covert operations were becoming more common. In the years following the war, the United States was becoming increasingly involved in global affairs, sometimes through direct military action, sometimes through economic influence, and other times through more covert means. What this means for the Star Ariel is important. It wasn't just a simple civilian flight. It was part of a larger geopolitical chess game. The Caribbean was a crucial region, both for economic interests like trade routes and resources, and for military positioning. In fact, some even speculate that the disappearance of the Star Ariel might have been connected to these larger, more complex geopolitical maneuvers. So, who was on board? On the Star Ariel were 20 individuals, passengers, and crew members. The flight wasn't packed with just anyone. These were likely individuals with ties to important organizations, businesses, and political entities. It's worth noting also that the airline was government-owned, with the British government having substantial influence over its operation. While there's no direct evidence of any political figures or high-profile persons on the flight, the reality of that time means we can't dismiss the possibility that someone with a background tied to intelligence, military, or high-level trade was aboard. This is one of those lingering questions that remains unanswered. The Star Ariel was a Bristol 170 freighter, a twin-engine aircraft that had been in service with BSAA since 1947. It was designed for both civilian and military purposes, with the versatility to carry both passengers and cargo. The plane was well regarded for its durability and capability in long-range travel, and there were no significant mechanical issues reported before it took off from Bermuda. So mechanically, it shouldn't have been an issue. But as we know with aviation, sometimes even the most reliable machines can fail unexpectedly, and when they do, it's often in the most mysterious of ways. Now, this period in time was indeed one of heightened military tensions. While World War II had officially ended in 1945, its aftermath left the world in a state of constant uncertainty. The US and the Soviet Union were engaging in a geopolitical power struggle that would only intensify into the Cold War. Military alliances and covert operations were becoming common, and every corner of the globe became a potential battleground for influence. In the Caribbean, this wasn't just a concern for a military strategist. It also had serious economic implications. The British Empire was on the decline, and its former colonies, like Jamaica, were being pulled into the growing influence of the United States. Jamaica was becoming a key player in this geopolitical transition. For the US, controlling the Caribbean and its surrounding areas wasn't just about politics. It was also about the military, setting up bases, maintaining influence, and even monitoring global shipping lanes. This backdrop of shifting power dynamics mean that every flight, every move made in the region carried the potential for espionage or covert operations. The Star Ariel's flight path through the Caribbean was not just a simple air route. It could have intersected with military interests or even served as an unintentional pawn in a much larger game. Was the US involved? This is where the conspiracy theories start to run wild. Could the US have been involved in the disappearance of the Star Ariel? We have to consider the Cold War context. The US was keenly focused on securing its influence over the Caribbean, and at the time, British interests were seen as somewhat of a hindrance to this. Could there have been a strategic motive to take down or sabotage the Star Ariel to send a message or remove potential obstacles? While there's no direct evidence to suggest US involvement, it's hard to dismiss this possibility outright, especially when considering how little was found in terms of wreckage. Was this a well-executed covert operation? We also have to consider the role of military intelligence agencies that were active in this region, such as the US Navy or the CIA, which was still in its early years. Could they have been monitoring flights like the Star Ariel, perhaps aware of something that we are still unaware of? Again, there's no solid evidence, but the context of the time, especially with the US securing its foothold in the Caribbean, raises some interesting questions. Now, this brings us to a key point. The Cold War was not just about nuclear threats and political rivalry. It was also about intelligence. Spying, covert operations, and even sabotage were not out of the question. Given the nature of this flight, its destination, and the international political atmosphere, we can't rule out that the disappearance of the Star Ariel could have been part of a larger covert mission, or perhaps even an accident tied to one. Now, with all of that in mind, we can start to connect the dots. The world was changing rapidly, and the Star Ariel was caught right in the middle of it. Was the disappearance related to mechanical failure, or was it part of something bigger? Something involving political maneuvering, intelligence, or even a Cold War era operation? Could there be a connection between what happened to the Star Ariel and other aviation mysteries like MH370? What we know for sure is that the Star Ariel wasn't just a flight. It was a key piece of a much larger puzzle. Now, let's bring the focus back to the official investigation. Authorities concluded that the most likely cause of the disappearance was a mechanical failure or a navigational error. But here's the kicker. The search efforts were vast, spanning hundreds of miles, but still nothing was found. No wreckage, no black box, nothing. And with such a massive area to cover, it becomes clear why this mystery has stood the test of time. It's like finding a needle in a haystack, but the haystack is as big as an entire ocean. So, what do we make of all this? Are we just left with theories and speculations, or is there something more? Some experts argue that aviation back in the 1940s was still in its infancy, and accidents like these were bound to happen. Others see a pattern in these disappearances, like MH370, and believe there's something darker and more complex happening behind the scenes. But until we find the solid evidence, all we can do is continue to search for answers. The Star Ariel incident remains a haunting reminder of how quickly things can go wrong, and how mysterious aviation disasters can be. Theories will continue to swirl, whether it's the Bermuda Triangle, mechanical failure, or even secret government operations. But without concrete answers, it's an enigma that will likely remain unsolved, much like so many other unexplained disappearances throughout history. In the end, this story isn't just about a missing plane. It's about the fear of the unknown. It's about the idea that sometimes there are no easy answers, just endless possibilities. The Star Ariel might have been lost, but its legacy still lingers in the minds of those who want to solve this great aviation mystery. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video interesting or informative, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't yet subscribed to Elite Jamaica, please do so. Until we meet again, thank you. Stay blessed.